Sometimes the quietest acts of compassion happen when no one is watching, or so we think. Sarah had always been the type to notice what others missed. The trembling stray by the subway entrance, the elderly man struggling with groceries, the child crying alone on a park bench. She never sought recognition for these moments, never expected anything in return. But what happens when a single act of kindness, witnessed by someone powerful, becomes the thread that unravels a lifetime of being overlooked? What happens when the person you helped in their darkest moment holds the key to transforming yours, and neither of you realizes it until fate brings you face to face again? Sometimes the smallest gestures create ripples that travel through decades, connecting two souls across the vast divide of circumstance and time, proving that no act of love is ever truly invisible. The worn library badge hung from Sarah's neck like a quiet declaration of invisibility. For 3 years, she had moved through the Chicago Public Library's downtown branch like a shadow reshelving books, processing returns, helping patrons find what they needed while remaining largely unnoticed herself. Her name tag reads Sarah because even her supervisor, Mr. Rodriguez, had never bothered to learn her last name was Mitchell Dot at 26. Sarah had perfected the art of being helpful without being seen. She knew exactly which computer terminals had loose connections, which patrons needed large print books but were too proud to ask, and where to find the obscure reference materials that stumped even the senior librarians. Yet when recognition or opportunities arose, they seemed to flow around her like water around a stone. "You're too quiet," Mr. Rodriguez had told her during her last evaluation, his pen tapping impatiently against his clipboard. "In this field, you need to speak up, take initiative. Otherwise, you'll always be just another assistant." Sarah had nodded and smiled, swallowing the words that crowded her throat. She wanted to tell him about the literacy program she'd quietly started for the homeless visitors, or how she'd memorized the reading preferences of dozens of regular patrons to better serve them. Instead, she'd simply promised to work on being more visible. The irony wasn't lost on her. Growing up in the foster care system had taught her that being visible often meant being vulnerable. At Mercy Children's Home, the kids who spoke up, who demanded attention, were the ones who got moved from placement to placement. Sarah had learned early that safety lay in being useful but unobtrusive, helpful but not demanding. Her small apartment reflected this philosophy: neat, functional, but sparse. The walls held no family photos because there were none to display. Instead, she had filled the space with books from library sales, their pages worn soft from countless readings. Each book was a friend that never judged, never left, never forgot her name. Charlotte, the only coworker who bothered to include Sarah in conversations, often marveled at her knowledge. "How do you remember all this stuff?" she'd ask when Sarah could instantly locate an obscure title or recall a patron's specific request from weeks earlier. "I pay attention," Sarah would answer simply. What she didn't say was that when you've spent your life being overlooked, you become expert at noticing everything else, the details others miss, the people others ignore, the small kindnesses that keep the world turning. Her lunch breaks were sacred. While her colleagues gossiped in the staff room, Sarah would take her peanut butter sandwich to the small park across the street. There, she would read and watch the city move around her, business people rushing past, children playing, elderly, couples feeding pigeons. She cataloged these moments like books, filing away the ordinary beauty that others were too busy to see. Yesterday, she'd helped an elderly man locate genealogy records for his family research. He'd spent 2 hours at her desk, and she'd patiently guided him through the database, even staying 15 minutes past her scheduled break. When he finally found the record he needed, his eyes had filled with tears. "Thank you, dear," he'd whispered, pressing her hand briefly. "You've given me back my grandfather's story." It was moments like these that made the anonymity worthwhile. Sarah might be invisible to her supervisors and overlooked for promotions, but she knew she mattered to someone. That had to be enough. As closing time approached each day, Sarah would perform her final ritual, straightening chairs, ensuring all computers were properly shut down, and checking that the return slot was clear. The library was more than her workplace. It was her sanctuary, the place where she could be useful without being judged, where knowledge mattered more than charisma. Tonight would be different, though she didn't know it yet. Tonight, her ordinary, world was about to intersect with something extraordinary. The golden retriever sat trembling in the narrow alley beside the library, its fur matted with rain and city grime. Sarah noticed him immediately as she stepped out for her lunch break, the way she noticed all creatures in distress, with a sharp intake of breath and an immediate urge to help. Most people hurried past, their umbrellas tilted against the October drizzle, too focused on their destinations to see the animal's obvious distress. But Sarah had never been most people. She crouched down slowly, her library badge swaying as she moved, and extended her hand palm up. "Hey, beautiful," she whispered, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she used with nervous patrons. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The dog's ears perked slightly, but he remained pressed against the brick wall, his brown eyes wide with confusion and fear. Around his neck was a collar that caught the dim light leather, so fine it looked expensive, studded with what appeared to be genuine diamonds. This was no stray. This was someone's beloved companion, lost and terrified. Sarah's heart clenched. She knew that feeling, the bewildering panic of being displaced, of not knowing where you belonged or who might come looking for you. She'd felt it every time she'd been moved between foster homes, clutching a garbage bag of belongings and hoping the next place might finally feel like home. "I know, sweetheart," she murmured, settling onto her knees despite the damp pavement soaking through her worn slacks. "You're scared, but I'm going to help you find your way home." The dog took a tentative step forward, drawn by something in her voice. Sarah remained perfectly still, letting him come to her at his own pace. When his cold nose finally touched her fingertips, she felt the familiar warmth of connection that made all her struggles worthwhile. "That's it," she breathed, gently stroking behind his ears. "You're such a good boy. What's your name, I wonder?" She checked his collar for tags, finding a small silver pendant that read Max in elegant script, but no contact information. Her lunch money, a crumpled $5 bill, and some change wouldn't buy much, but it would get them both something to eat and drink. At the corner deli, she bought a bottle of water and a plain turkey sandwich, ignoring the counterman's skeptical look when she explained it was for a lost dog. Outside, she tore the sandwich into small pieces, offering them to Max along with water cupped in her palms. "I bet you're worried about your family," she said as Max ate gratefully. "They're probably looking everywhere for you. Don't worry, we'll figure this out." Across the street, unbeknownst to Sarah, a black sedan idled at the curb. Inside, Marcus Wellington gripped his phone, debating whether to cancel his 2 p.m. acquisition meeting. He'd been circling the block for 20 minutes, searching for Max, when he'd spotted the dog in the alley. But now he couldn't move, transfixed by the scene unfolding before him. The young woman kneeling beside his dog moved with such careful tenderness, such instinctive compassion, that it stirred something deep in his chest. She was sharing her lunch with a stranger's pet, using her bare hands as a water bowl, talking to Max as if he were a frightened child rather than an animal. "Sir?" His driver, James, ventured carefully. "The Hartwell Group is expecting you in 10 minutes. Marcus didn't answer. He was watching the woman, really watching her, and something about her profile, the gentle way she tilted her head as she spoke, tugged at a memory he couldn't quite grasp. There was something familiar about her, something that reached across years of carefully constructed success to touch a part of himself he'd thought long buried. "Sir? Another minute," Marcus murmured, his eyes never leaving the small tableau of kindness playing out in the drizzle. He had the strangest feeling that this moment, this woman caring for his lost dog with such intuitive grace, was going to change everything. Marcus Wellington's business card lay crisp and untouched in his jacket pocket, bearing the weight of his reputation. CEO, Wellington Industries, embossed in gold lettering. At 34, he commanded boardrooms with the same ease other men, ordered coffee, his decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions in revenue. Yet sitting in his sedan, watching a stranger care for his lost dog, he felt as uncertain as a child. "The Hartwell acquisition can't wait much longer," James said carefully, adjusting the rearview mirror to catch his employer's eye. In 12 years of service, he'd never seen Mr. Wellington miss a meeting, let alone sit motionless while important clients waited. Marcus barely heard him. His attention was riveted on the young woman who had transformed his frantic search into something approaching wonder. She moved with such natural grace, such unforced kindness that it seemed to slow time itself. When she cupped water in her palms for Max to drink, Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than logic. "She's using her lunch money," he murmured, more to himself than to James. "Sir, look at her." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Her clothes are second-hand but clean. Her shoes are worn but polished. That $5 bill she spent on food, it probably represents her entire lunch budget. And she's sharing it with a dog she's never seen before." James glanced in the rearview mirror, noting the unusual intensity in his employer's voice. In all their years together, he'd never heard Marcus speak with such vulnerability. The man who negotiated million-dollar deals with ice-cold precision was studying this scene like it held the secrets of the universe. "Should I approach her about Max?" "Not yet." Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his wallet, where a faded photograph rested between credit cards and business receipts. The image was 20 years old, two children in a group home, sharing a single book between them. The girl in the photo had the same gentle tilt her head, the same way of listening with her whole body that he was witnessing now. God, it couldn't be her. The odds were astronomical. Chicago was a city of millions, and the girl from Mercy Children's home had probably moved on, built a life far from the shadows of their shared past. But the resemblance, the instinctive kindness, the way she seemed to understand Max's fear without words, it all felt hauntingly familiar. "Sir, if we don't leave now, cancel the meeting." James's eyebrows shot up. "Cancel? But sir, the Hartwell deal will wait." Marcus's voice carried quiet authority. "Tell them something urgent came up. Family matter. Reschedule for tomorrow." As if sensing the weight of observation, the woman looked up from Max, her gaze sweeping the street. For a moment, Marcus thought she might see him through the sedan's tinted windows. But her attention was already returning to the dog, her focus complete and unwavering. This was how kindness looked when it thought no one was watching. Pure, instinctive, without calculation or performance. Marcus had spent years in boardrooms where every gesture was strategic, every word measured for effect. He'd forgotten that such genuine compassion existed. "James," he said quietly, "I need you to find out everything you can about that woman. Start with the library. She's wearing an employee badge. But be discreet, very discreet." "Of course, sir." Marcus settled back in his seat, his meaning forgotten. Whatever was happening here felt bigger than business, more important than acquisitions. It felt like destiny finally catching up with him. The handwritten found dog flyers that Sarah created on library copy paper were works of art in their simplicity. Using a black pen and her careful, practiced handwriting, she sketched a rough outline of Max's gentle face and wrote, "Found, beautiful golden retriever, very sweet, wearing expensive collar. Owner must be worried sick. Please call Sarah at the downtown library if this is your beloved pet." She included the library's main number and her extension, knowing Mr. Rodriguez would disapprove, but hoping he'd understand if it came to that. Max sat patiently beside her desk as she worked, his presence drawing curious glances from patrons who weren't used to seeing animals in the quiet halls. "You're going to get in trouble," Charlotte whispered, sliding up to Sarah's circulation desk with a stack of returned books. Her friend's auburn curls were escaping from their ponytail, and her eyes darted nervously toward Mr. Rodriguez's office. "You know how he feels about disruptions." "I can't just leave him outside," Sarah replied, not looking up from her careful lettering. "Look at him, Charlotte. He's terrified. Someone's family is missing him right now." Charlotte glanced down at Max, who had somehow positioned himself so that his warm body pressed against Sarah's legs. His eyes tracked her movements with devoted attention, as if he'd decided she was his anchor in this strange place. "He's chosen you," Charlotte observed with a smile. "Dogs have good instincts about people." During her afternoon break, Sarah taped the flyers to telephone poles, community bulletin boards, and shop windows within a 3-block radius of where she'd found Max. The drizzle had stopped, but the October air carried the promise of harder rain to come. Max walked beside her without a leash, staying close as if he understood their mission. At Murphy's coffee shop, the owner, a gruff man with kind eyes, not only let her post the flyer, but offered Max a bowl of water and the remnants of a breakfast sandwich. "Good on you for helping him," Murphy said, scratching behind Max's ears. "World needs more people who stop to notice." The comment warmed Sarah more than the coffee she couldn't afford to buy. She was used to being helpful within the library's walls. But taking her compassion to the streets felt different, more visible, more vulnerable. Yet watching Max's tail wag as strangers offered gentle pets and encouraging words, she realized kindness had a way of multiplying itself. Back at the library, trouble was waiting. Mr. Rodriguez stood beside her desk, his arms crossed and his expression stern. Max sat precisely where she'd left him, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Mitchell," Mr. Rodriguez said, using her last name like a reprimand. "This is a library, not an animal shelter." "I know, sir. I'm sorry. I found him lost and scared, and I'm trying to locate his owner." Sarah's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "He's not causing any disruption. He's a liability issue. What if someone's allergic? What if he damages library property?" Before Sarah could respond, an elderly patron approached the desk. Mrs. Chun, a regular who spent hours researching her family's immigration history, smiled down at Max. "Such a sweet boy," she said, then looked up at Mr. Rodriguez. "You should be proud of your employee. This young lady helped me for 3 hours yesterday, finding records everyone else said didn't exist. She has a gift for caring." Mrs. Chun's eyes moved pointedly between Max and Sarah. Animals sense that quality in people. Mr. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly, caught between his rigid policies and a patron's praise. "The dog can stay until closing," he conceded grudgingly. "But this cannot become a pattern." As he walked away, Charlotte squeezed Sarah's shoulder. "You did the right thing," she whispered. "Some rules are worth bending for kindness." Sarah stroked Max's head, marveling at how he'd remained calm throughout the confrontation, as if he trusted her to protect him. She'd spent her whole life feeling invisible, but Max saw her clearly, and in his trusting gaze, she glimpsed a reflection of her own worth. The faded photograph in Marcus Wellington's wallet had been carried for 20 years, its edges soft from handling. As he sat in his office high above the Chicago streets, he studied the image with new intensity. 2 children in the common room. At Mercy Children's home, a thin boy and a gentle girl sharing a worn copy of Where the Red Fern Grows. He had been 12 then, angry at the world and convinced he was unlovable. Sarah, he could barely remember her last name, then had been 10, already wise in the quiet ways that kept you safe in the system. While other kids fought for attention or rebelled against the endless parade of temporary guardians, Sarah had simply endured, offering small kindnesses when no adult was watching. The memory crystallized with painful clarity. His first night at Mercy, terrified and defiant after his grandmother's death had left him truly alone. He'd refused dinner, refused to speak, refused to acknowledge the other children who tried to include him in their games. But when lights out came and he lay rigid with grief and fear, Sarah had appeared beside his bed like a guardian angel. "Sometimes it helps to read," she'd whispered, pressing a book into his hands. "When the feelings get too big, the words make room for them." She'd stayed there until he fell asleep, her small hand resting lightly on his shoulder, asking nothing in return for her comfort. In the morning, she'd smiled at him across the breakfast table, as if their midnight encounter was their shared secret, never mentioning his tears or his whispered thanks. For 3 months, she'd been his anchor. When older boys mocked his second-hand clothes, Sarah would quietly share her library books, creating worlds where they could escape together. When he struggled with homework, she'd sit beside him at the battered kitchen table, patiently explaining math problems with the same gentle persistence she'd shown. Max today. Then came the call that changed everything. His father's brother in Seattle, a man Marcus had never met, willing to take custody. The social worker had called it a miracle family, stepping forward, a real home, a chance at stability. Marcus had been ecstatic until he saw Sarah's face at the farewell gathering. "I'm happy for you," she'd said, her smile brave but her eyes reflecting a grief too deep for her young face. "You deserve a family." He'd promised to write, to stay in touch, to never forget her. But 17-year-old boys in new cities with new opportunities had short memories, and the guilt of his broken promise had eventually been buried under the demands of college, career, and building the empire that now bore his name. Now, 20 years later, That same gentle soul was caring for his lost dog with the exact tenderness she'd once shown a grieving boy. The universe had a sense of irony that took his breath away. Marcus reached for his phone, then stopped. How did you approach someone from your past without sounding insane? How did you explain that you'd recognize them not by their FaceTime, had changed them both, but by their spirit, the unique way they moved through the world with quiet grace? The business card on his desk seemed inadequate now. CEO, Wellington Industries, meant nothing to the girl, who had taught him that kindness was the most powerful force in the world. He needed to find another way to reconnect, one that honored what they'd shared and what she'd given him. He picked up his phone and dialed James. I need you to research something else. Max's personalized dog tags jingled softly as he lifted his head from Sarah's lap, his entire body suddenly alert. She followed his gaze to see a tall man in an expensive overcoat approaching the library's information desk, his confident stride at odds with the uncertainty in his dark eyes. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying the polish of boardrooms and business dinners. I believe you found my dog. Sarah's breath caught as she looked up at him, really looked. There was something familiar about the angle of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders, but she couldn't place it. Max, however, had no such confusion. He bounded toward the man with joy so pure made Sarah's chest tighten. Max! The man dropped to one knee, his composure cracking as the golden retriever covered his face with kisses. God, I was so worried about you. How did you get so far from home? Watching their reunion, Sarah felt the familiar pang of being outside looking in, the same feeling she'd carried through countless foster home gatherings, where families were reunited while she remained peripheral. She began to gather her things quietly, not wanting to intrude on their moment. Wait, the man said, rising to his full height with Max pressed against his legs. Please, I need to thank you properly. Up close, Sarah could see the genuine relief in his features, the way his expensive facade had crumbled in the face of real emotion. He seems wonderful, she said simply. I could tell he was well loved. How long did you stay with him? Marcus asked, studying her face with an intensity that made her fidget with her library badge. Just this afternoon. I found him around lunchtime, scared and wet. We made some flyers. She gestured toward the desk where her careful handwriting announced the found dog. Marcus picked up one of the flyers, his fingers tracing the simple sketch she'd drawn. You bought him food. It wasn't a question, and Sarah wasn't sure how he knew, but she nodded. He was hungry. With your lunch money. Now she looked at him sharply. How did you? I saw you. Marcus's voice dropped to almost a whisper from across the street. I'd been searching for hours, and then I saw you with him, sharing your sandwich, giving him water from your hands, like he was precious cargo instead of a stranger's pet. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. The shape of his eyes, the way he tilted his head when he spoke, it triggered a memory so distant she almost dismissed it. Do I know you? She asked hesitantly. Marcus reached into his wallet, withdrawing a business card that he placed on the desk between them. Sarah read it with growing surprise. Marcus Wellington, CEO, Wellington Industries. You might, he said carefully, though it's been a very long time. Before she could respond, Max somehow managed to loop his leash around both their legs, drawing them closer together in his enthusiasm. They laughed at the same moment, Sarah's soft and surprised, Marcus's rich and warm, and in that shared moment of amusement, something clicked. Sarah Mitchell, Marcus said suddenly, his eyes lighting with recognition. Mercy Children's Home, you gave me a book my first night there. The world tilted. Sarah stared at him, seeing past the expensive clothes and confident bearing to the scared 12-year-old boy who had clutched where the red fern grows like a lifeline. Marcus Chun, she whispered, using the name she remembered. You changed your name. I took my adoptive family's name when my uncle gained custody, but I never forgot the girl who taught me that books could save you. Max wagged his tail as if he'd orchestrated the entire reunion. Sarah's nervous hands moved automatically as they talked, folding and refolding a library receipt into increasingly intricate shapes. She didn't realize she was doing it until Marcus's eyes fixed on her fingers with startling recognition. You still make those, he said softly, watching as the small piece of paper transformed into a delicate origami crane. Make what? Sarah followed his gaze to her hands, surprised to find the tiny bird perched on her palm. Oh, this. I don't even think about it anymore. When I'm nervous or thinking, my hands just... You made me one once, Marcus interrupted, his voice thick with memory. My second week at Mercy, I was angry about something probably. Angry about everything, and you sat down beside me without saying a word. Just folded paper into a crane and left it on my desk. Sarah stared at the small bird in her palm, the memory surfacing like a photograph, developing in solution. You kept it, she whispered. I saw it on your knitstand for weeks. I kept it until it fell apart from handling. It was the first gift anyone had given me in years. Marcus leaned against the circulation desk, his polished exterior giving way to something more vulnerable. I used to make them myself after that, but they never looked like yours. The admission hung between them, weighted with 20 years of separation and the strange providence that had brought them together again. Around them, the library hummed with its usual quiet activity, patrons researching, students studying, a soft percussion of keyboards and turning pages. But their corner felt suspended in time, a bubble where past and present converged. I can't believe you're here, Sarah murmured, her fingers automatically smoothing the crane's wings. In Chicago, I mean. What are the odds? I moved here 5 years ago when Wellington Industries expanded. Sometimes I'd drive past Mercy, but it's been torn down. Condos now. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. I used to wonder what happened to everyone, especially you. The simple statement carried more weight than Sarah expected. In the foster system, you learn to move forward, not to look back. Attachments were temporary by design, and dwelling on departed friends was a luxury that led to heartbreak. She'd trained herself not to wonder about the boy who had been swept away to Seattle, not to imagine what kind of man he'd become. I stayed in Chicago, she said simply. Foster care, then community college, then this job. Marcus nodded, understanding. All the challenges compressed into that brief summary. The system isn't designed to make things easy. No, Sarah agreed, but it teaches you to appreciate small kindnesses, like finding lost dogs. They smiled at each other then, the tension easing into something warmer. Max, as if sensing the shift, settled at their feet with a contented sigh. He likes you, Marcus observed. Dogs are good judges of character, Sarah replied, then blushed at the implication. They are, Marcus agreed, his eyes never leaving her face. The best. The overdue notice stamp came down with more force than necessary, its red ink bleeding across the due date like an accusation. Sarah stared at the mark, her mind still reeling from the impossible encounter with Marcus Wellington now. She corrected herself. CEO of a company whose name appeared on half the buildings downtown. Earth to Sarah, Charlotte said, sliding a stack of returns across the circulation desk. You've been in another world since that man picked up his dog. Everything okay? Sarah set down the stamp carefully, arranging her thoughts like books on a shelf. How did you explain that your quiet, predictable life had just intersected with destiny? That the scared boy from your shared past had grown into someone whose business card commanded instant respect? He knew me, she said finally, from before. We were in foster care together. Charlotte's eyebrows shot up. Seriously? What are the odds? That's what I keep thinking. Sarah picked up another book, her movements automatic after years of practice. 20 years, Charlotte. I haven't seen him since we were children. And now he's this successful businessman who drives around in sedans looking for lost dogs, Charlotte mused. Sounds like a fairy tale. Before Sarah could respond, Mr. Rodriguez materialized beside their desk, his expression stern behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Mitchell, I need to speak with you about this afternoon's single quotes S. irregularities. Sarah's stomach dropped. The dog situation? Bringing animals into the library violates multiple policies. Health codes, liability issues, professional standards. He consulted his clipboard as if reading charges in court. I've been lenient because of your work record, but this cannot happen again. I understand, Mr. Rodriguez. It was an exceptional circumstance. There are no exceptional circumstances when it comes to policy. His voice carried the weight of someone who had never been lost, never been desperate, never felt responsible for another creature's well-being. Professional behavior means following protocols, not making emotional decisions. Sarah nodded, her face burning with familiar shame. In foster care, she'd learned that adults' disapproval could reshape your entire world with a few critical words. Even now, at 26, that old vulnerability surfaced whenever authority figures questioned her judgment. After Mr. Rodriguez departed, Charlotte touched Sarah's arm gently. "Ignore him. You did something beautiful today." "Did I?" Sarah resumed, stamping books, each thud of the stamp echoing her doubts. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I was unprofessional." Unprofessional would have been ignoring a scared animal. What you did was human. The afternoon crept by with the familiar rhythm of circulation duties, checking books in and out, answering reference questions, helping patrons navigate the computer catalog. But Sarah felt different, as if Marcus's recognition had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of herself. Closing time. She performed her usual ritual, straightening chairs, shutting down computers, ensuring the return slot was clear. But tonight, as she gathered her worn purse and lightweight jacket, she found herself looking toward the street where Marcus's sedan had been parked, half expecting to see him waiting. The street was empty, except for the usual evening commuters, hurrying toward bus stops and train stations. Of course, he was gone back to his world of boardrooms and business deals, his brief venture into her ordinary life already becoming memory. Walking to the bus stop, Sarah pulled her jacket closer. Against the October chill, the origami crane from this afternoon was still in her pocket, its paper softened by nervous handling. She'd almost given it to Marcus, but something had held her back, the same instinct that had taught her to guard her heart in foster care. Tomorrow would bring the same routine: circulation desk, overdue stamps, invisible service to visible people. But tonight, Sarah carried the strange warmth of being remembered, of mattering to someone who had grown beyond their shared past into something remarkable. Even if she never saw him again, that was enough. The foster care system directory from 1998 lay open on Marcus's mahogany desk, its pages yellowed with age and bureaucratic neglect. He'd had James track down this relic from the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, needing concrete proof of what his heart already knew. There, in faded typewriter font, were their names: Marcus Chun and Sarah Mitchell, residents of Mercy Children's Home from September through December 1998. The records painted their shared story in clinical terms that stripped away all warmth and wonder. Subject exhibits adjustment difficulties following parental abandonment. Subject demonstrates exceptional empathy and compliance with institutional rules. The bureaucratic language couldn't capture the frightened boy who had found solace in a gentle girl's kindness. But it confirmed the timeline Marcus remembered. He traced Sarah's documented path with growing admiration and heartbreak. After his departure to Seattle, she'd remained in the system until aging out at 18. Community college records showed a partial scholarship for library science, followed by employment at the Chicago Public Library System. No marriage records, no children, no extended family to speak of. She'd built her life alone, with the same quiet determination she'd shown as a child. The employment records show she's been at the downtown branch for 3 years, James reported, consulting his notes. Exemplary performance reviews, though her supervisor notes she's too reserved for advancement opportunities. Annual salary of $32,000. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. $32,000 in Chicago barely covered basic expenses. Yet Sarah had used her lunch money to feed his dog without hesitation. The contrast between their lives struck him like a physical blow. He spent more on business dinners in a month than she earned in a year. What about education? He asked. Associate's degree in library science from Chicago City College. Completed in 2019. She worked 2 jobs to pay for a library assistant during the day, cleaning office buildings at night. James paused, studying his employer's expression. Sir, if I may ask, why the extensive background check? Is this related to company security? Marcus closed the directory carefully. How did you explain that this quiet librarian had saved more than his dog today? That she'd unknowingly rescued a part of his soul he'd thought permanently lost to success and cynicism? She's someone important from my past, he said simply. Someone who helped me when I needed it most. The truth was more complicated than that. Sarah represented everything he'd almost forgotten in his climb to the top: the value of small kindnesses, the power of presence over performance, the beauty of caring for others without calculating the return on investment. In 3 hours, she'd reminded him of who he used to be before ambition had hardened his heart into something resembling his business card. He pulled up Wellington Industries' corporate giving portfolio on his computer, scrolling through the charitable organizations they supported: scholarship funds, literacy programs, foster care advocacy groups. All worthy causes that felt abstract and distant compared to one woman sharing her sandwich with a lost dog. "James, I want you to research something else," Marcus said, his fingers drumming against the desk. "Educational scholarship programs, specifically ones that might benefit library workers looking to advance their careers. Are you considering expanding our charitable giving?" "I'm considering creating something new, something personal." Marcus stood and walked to his office window, gazing down at the city where Sarah moved through her invisible life. Sometimes the best investments aren't about profit margins. Sometimes they're about paying forward the kindness that saved you. Below, the lights of Chicago twinkled like possibilities, each one representing a life, a story, a chance to make a difference. Somewhere in that vast tapestry, Sarah was probably reading in her small apartment, unaware that her childhood friend was planning to change her world the same way she'd once changed his. The Wellington Foundation scholarship application appeared on the library's bulletin board, like a small miracle printed on cream-colored paper. Sarah discovered it during her morning routine of straightening informational displays, her eyes drawn to the elegant letterhead and the phrase that made her heart skip: educational opportunities for library professionals. She read the announcement twice, convinced she was misunderstanding something. Wellington Industries was offering a full scholarship for library science professionals to pursue advanced degrees, complete with a paid internship and mentorship program. The application deadline was just 3 weeks away, an unusually short time frame that suggested urgency. "Did you see this?" Charlotte appeared at her elbow, breathless with excitement. "Sarah, this could be perfect for you. Full tuition, living stipend, everything." "I saw it," Sarah replied quietly, though her pulse was racing. The coincidence felt too enormous to process. 2 days ago, she'd helped a lost dog and discovered her childhood friend had become one of Chicago's most successful businessmen. Now his company was offering exactly the kind of opportunity she dreamed about but never dared pursue. "You have to apply," Charlotte continued, practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Your performance reviews are stellar. You have all that experience with community programming and your passion for literacy work." "Charlotte," Sarah's voice carried a warning. "Look at the requirements." They read together: master's degree candidacy, 5 years minimum experience, demonstrated leadership in community outreach, letters of recommendation from professional references. The list went on, each requirement a reminder of Sarah's limitations. "I don't have a bachelor's degree," Sarah said simply, "just my associates from community college." "But you have experience that matters more than credentials," Charlotte argued. "You've been doing master's level work for years. The literacy program you started, the way you help patrons with research, your knowledge of database systems. You're more qualified than half the people with fancy degrees." Sarah wanted to believe her friend's words, but she'd learned not to reach for things that felt too far away. Dreams had a way of becoming disappointments in her experience, and the higher you climbed, the farther you had to fall. "Besides," Charlotte added with a mischievous grin, "what's the worst that could happen? They say no? You're already hearing no from Mr. Rodriguez every time promotion opportunities come up." That stung because it was true. Sarah had watched younger, less experienced colleagues advance while she remained frozen in her entry-level position, her quiet competence overlooked in favor of more assertive personalities. She found herself thinking about Marcus, the scared boy who had become a CEO, who had somehow transformed his foster care background into success rather than limitation. Maybe the past didn't have to define your future. Maybe sometimes the universe offered you exactly what you needed when you were brave enough to reach for it. "The essay requirement," Sarah murmured, reading further. "They want a personal statement about overcoming challenges and your vision for advancing library services in underserved communities. You could write that in your sleep," Charlotte said firmly. You've lived it. During her lunch break, Sarah walked to the small park across from the library. The same place where she'd helped Max just days earlier. The application burned in her pocket like a secret, its possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. She thought about the boy Marcus had been angry, hurt, convinced he was unwanted, and how he'd somehow found the courage to build something magnificent from his pain. Maybe this scholarship wasn't really about library science. Maybe it was about second chances, about childhood friends who remembered each other's kindness across 20 years of separation. Maybe Marcus was offering her the same gift she'd once given him, the belief that she was worth saving. The October wind scattered leaves around her feet as Sarah pulled out her phone and photographed the application. Whether this was coincidence or providence, she was going to find out. For the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell was going to reach for something that felt impossible. She was going to apply. Sarah's handwritten essay filled 3 pages of legal pad paper, her careful script flowing like water finding its course. She'd started and restarted the personal statement a dozen times before finally letting her truth pour onto the page without editing, without censoring, without the careful restraint that usually governed her words. Overcoming challenges has been less about dramatic victories and more about quiet persistence, she wrote. Growing up in foster care taught me that stability is a luxury, but dignity is a choice. When you age out of the system at 18 with a garbage bag of belongings and no family to call, you learn that education isn't just opportunity, it's survival. The honesty surprised her. Sarah had spent years minimizing her background, offering vague references to a difficult childhood when applications required personal information. But something about this scholarship, about Marcus's reappearance in her life, demanded complete truth. She wrote about working 2 jobs to afford community college, studying in hospital waiting rooms during her night cleaning shifts, and choosing library science because books had been her salvation when people failed her. She described the literacy program she'd created for homeless patrons, how she'd used her own money to buy materials when the library's budget fell short. There was a boy I knew once, she wrote, her pen hesitating only briefly before continuing. He was angry and hurt, convinced he was unwanted. I gave him a book and watched words heal what adults couldn't fix. That's when I learned that libraries aren't just repositories for information, they're sanctuaries for souls seeking transformation. The essay revealed her vision for expanding library services in underserved communities, mobile units for elderly residents, after-school programs for latchkey children, career development workshops for people aging out of foster care. Each idea grew from her own experience of being overlooked, of understanding what it meant to need help and not know where to find it. Charlotte read the final draft with tears in her eyes. Sarah, this is beautiful. It's heartbreaking and hopeful, and so incredibly you. It's too personal, Sarah worried, reading over her friend's shoulder. I sound like I'm asking for pity. You sound like someone who's survived and wants to help others do the same, Charlotte corrected. That's exactly what they're looking for. The letters of recommendation had been easier to secure than expected. Mrs. Chun, the elderly patron, whose genealogy research Sarah had supported, turned out to be a retired college professor who wrote a glowing endorsement. The head librarian from Sarah's community college program contributed another, praising her exceptional dedication and intuitive understanding of information science principles. Mr. Rodriguez's letter was more perfunctory but professional, acknowledging her consistent performance and reliability. It wasn't enthusiastic, but it was honest, and Sarah appreciated that he'd written it at all, despite his disapproval of her irregular methods. As she sealed the application envelope, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained over her hopes for so long. Win or lose, she'd told her story honestly. She'd reached beyond her comfortable invisibility towards something that might transform her life. The return address on the envelope read, Wellington Foundation, and Sarah allowed herself to imagine Marcus reading her words, recognizing the girl who had comforted him with books and kindness. Whether this opportunity was coincidence or intention, she'd given it her best effort. Now all she could do was wait and hope that sometimes childhood kindness came full circle. The conference room nameplate reading M. Wellington caught Sarah's eye the moment she stepped off the elevator at Wellington Industries. Her stomach clenched with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation as she followed the receptionist down. Corridors lined with modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Ms. Mitchell, a woman in an elegant navy suit, approached with a warm smile. I'm Jennifer Hayes, Director of Foundation Programs. Thank you for coming in today. Sarah smoothed her best interview outfit, a black blazer Charlotte had insisted she borrow, paired with her own modest gray skirt and low heels that clicked softly against the marble floors. Everything about this building spoke of success and power, from the minimalist furniture to the fresh flower. Arrangements that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Your application was extraordinary, Jennifer continued as they walked. We've never received such a compelling personal narrative. The selection committee was unanimous in wanting to meet you. Thank you, Sarah managed, though her voice sounded smaller than usual in the expansive hallway. I wasn't sure if I was qualified for such a prestigious program. Qualifications come in many forms, Jennifer replied cryptically. Sometimes life experience matters more than traditional credentials. They entered a conference room with a stunning view of the city Sarah had called home her entire life, though she'd never seen it from this perspective. Elevated, expansive, full of possibility. A mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that looked more expensive than any furniture Sarah had ever owned. Mr. Wellington will be conducting the interview personally, Jennifer explained, noting Sarah's surprise. He takes a special interest in her education initiatives. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Of course, Marcus would be involved. This was his foundation, his scholarship program. But somehow she'd imagined the interview process would be more anonymous, more distant from their personal connection. What if he thought she was taking advantage of their childhood friendship? What if this opportunity was just his way of offering charity to someone from his past? While we wait, Jennifer continued, settling into a chair across from Sarah, I'd love to hear more about your literacy program for homeless patrons. The innovation you showed in creating that with minimal resources was remarkable. Sarah found herself relaxing as she described her work, her passion overriding her nervousness. She explained how she'd noticed homeless individuals using the library, not just for shelter, but as a refuge for dignity. How she'd started with simple reading circles and expanded to include job application assistance and basic computer literacy. The key, she said, leaning forward slightly, was understanding that they weren't looking for charity. They needed recognition of their humanity, their intelligence, their desire to improve their circumstances. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. That perspective, seeing dignity in service rather than pity, aligns perfectly with the Wellington Foundation's philosophy. Before Sarah could ask what that meant, the conference room door opened. Marcus entered with the same confident stride she remembered from the library, but his expression was carefully neutral, professional. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his success without flaunting it, and his eyes met hers with a warmth that felt both familiar and appropriately distant. Ms. Mitchell, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for applying to our program. I've read your essay with great interest. His handshake was firm, professional, giving no indication of their shared history beyond what any careful reader might glean from her application. Sarah felt both relieved and slightly disappointed. She'd half hoped for some acknowledgement of their connection, some sign that this interview was about more than professional qualifications. Mr. Wellington, she replied, matching his formal tone. I'm honored to be considered. As he took his seat at the head of the table, Sarah realized this was her chance to prove she deserved this opportunity on her own merits, regardless of their past. The boy from foster care had become a man who commanded respect through achievement, not sentiment. Now, it was her turn to show what she could become. The childhood drawing lay between them on the mahogany conference table like a bridge across 20 years. Sarah stared at the faded crayon marks, two stick figures sitting beneath a tree, sharing a book with Sarah and Marcus, written in her careful 10-year-old script across the bottom. You kept this, she whispered, her professional composure crumbling as memories flooded back. She remembered making it during art therapy at Mercy, when the counselor had asked them to draw something that made them happy. She'd given it to Marcus the day before he left for Seattle, a small gift to remember their friendship. It's been in my wallet for 20 years, Marcus said softly, his CEO facade completely gone now. Jennifer had quietly excused herself moments earlier, sensing the personal nature of what was unfolding. Right next to that old photograph of us reading together. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She'd been holding back since seeing his nameplate. I thought you'd forgotten. When you didn't write. I did write, Marcus interrupted gently, for months. But the letters came back. You'd been moved to a different placement. And the system? Well, you know how the system works. Children disappear into it. The relief in his voice matched her own. All these years, she'd carried the small hurt of being forgotten by the one person who had mattered most during that difficult time, learning that he'd tried to stay connected, that bureaucracy, rather than indifference, had separated them, healed something in her chest she hadn't realized was still wounded. I looked for you, she admitted. When I turned 18 and aged out, I tried to find you through the records. But Marcus Chun in Seattle, there were dozens. I didn't know about the name change. My uncle's family was wonderful, Marcus explained. They gave me stability, education, opportunities I never could have imagined. But I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the girl who saved me with kindness when I was convinced I was unlovable. Sarah touched the drawing gently, marveling at how something so simple had carried such meaning across decades. You weren't unlovable, Marcus. You were hurt. There's a difference. You taught me that difference, he said, leaning forward earnestly. You showed me that books could be friends when people failed, that quiet kindness was more powerful than loud anger. Everything I became started with what you gave me in that place. The weight of his words settled between them. Sarah had spent her adult life feeling invisible, unimportant, contributing to the world in small ways that no one noticed. To learn that her childhood friendship had shaped someone's entire trajectory felt overwhelming and humbling. The scholarship, she said suddenly, understanding dawning. This isn't really about library science, is it? Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his face back into something recognizable from their shared past. It's about a lot of things. Yes, we genuinely want to support library professionals. Your field does incredible work with limited resources. But it's also about paying forward what was given to me. And yes, his voice grew softer, it's about making sure the girl who saved me gets the opportunities she deserves. Marcus, I can't accept charity. This isn't charity, Sarah. I've read your application, your essay, your letters of recommendation. You're exactly what this program needs. Someone who understands service from the ground up, who sees dignity in helping others, who knows what it means to transform lives through education and compassion. Sarah looked around the conference room, at the cityscape beyond the windows, at the evidence of Marcus's success surrounding them, at the drawing that proved their connection was real and precious and enduring. You really think I can do this? She asked, vulnerability creeping into her voice. Master's degree, research projects, leadership roles. It feels so far from where I am now. I think, Marcus said, reaching across the table to briefly cover her hand with his, that you've been preparing for this your entire life. Every challenge you've overcome, every person you've helped, every small kindness you've offered, it's all been leading to this moment. The boy from foster care had grown into a man who could open doors. But more importantly, he was offering her the chance to walk through them with dignity on her own merits, supported by belief rather than pity. For the first time since receiving the acceptance letter that morning, Sarah allowed herself to believe she was worthy of this extraordinary second chance. The acceptance letter on Wellington Foundation letterhead arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like the first day of spring. Though October's chill still painted the windows with frost, Sarah held the cream-colored paper with trembling fingers, reading the formal words that would reshape her entire future. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as this year's Wellington Foundation Scholar... The financial package was more generous than she dared imagine. Full tuition for a master's program at Northwestern University, a living stipend that exceeded her current salary, and a guaranteed position as a research coordinator at Wellington Industries upon completion. But more than the money, more than the prestige, was the simple recognition that she was worth investing in. Charlotte found her crying in the library break room, the letter clutched to her chest like a talisman. Happy tears? Her friend asked, gently, settling beside Sarah on the worn sofa. I don't know what these are, Sarah laughed, wiping her eyes. I've never felt anything like this before. It's like ... possibility. Like my life can be bigger than I ever imagined. You deserve this, Charlotte said firmly. You've always deserved this. The next weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of applications, orientations, and preparations. Northwestern's Library and Information Science program welcomed her with an enthusiasm that still felt surreal. Her advisor, Dr. Patricia Reeves, specialized in community outreach and underserved populations, exactly the area where Sarah's experience gave her unique insight. Your background brings perspectives our program desperately needs, Dr. Reeves explained during their first meeting. Too often, we train librarians to serve populations they don't understand. You've lived the challenges our future graduates will need to address. Sarah's first day at Wellington Industries as a part-time research coordinator felt like stepping into an alternate universe. The building that had intimidated her during the interview now hummed with familiar energy. Her office small, but with a window overlooked the same park where she'd eaten lunch during her library breaks. Marcus had maintained careful professional distance since the scholarship award, their interactions limited to friendly but formal exchanges in hallways. Sarah appreciated his discretion, understanding that their childhood connection needed space to evolve into something appropriate for their current circumstances. Her supervisor, Dr. Elena Vasquez, was a brilliant woman who specialized in educational policy research. Your first project, she explained, spreading reports across Sarah's desk, involves analyzing literacy program effectiveness in urban communities. We're particularly interested in innovative approaches with limited budgets. Sarah smiled, thinking of her homeless literacy initiative created with pocket change and determination. I have some ideas about that. The transition wasn't without challenges. Northwestern's coursework pushed her in ways community college never had, demanding theoretical frameworks for knowledge she'd gained through intuition and experience. Some evenings, she sat in the university library, a temple of learning that made her beloved downtown branch seem quaint, and wondered if she belonged among students who casually referenced concepts she was encountering for the first time. But then she'd remember Marcus at 12, angry and lost, transformed by the simple gift of a book and someone's belief in his worth. She'd think about the homeless patrons whose eyes lit up when they successfully navigated a computer application, or the elderly genealogy researcher whose family history she'd helped uncover. Education wasn't just about degrees and credentials, was about expanding your capacity to serve others, to solve problems, to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. On Friday afternoons, Sarah still visited the downtown library, partly to maintain connections with Charlotte and her old colleagues, but mostly to remind herself where this journey began. Mr. Rodriguez had been surprisingly gracious about her departure, even admitting that her irregular methods had inspired him to be more flexible with library policies. Sometimes, he'd said during her farewell gathering, the best professionals are the ones who see beyond the rules to serve the people. The copy of Office Hierarchy and You manual appeared on Sarah's desk like a passive-aggressive gift, accompanied by a sticky note from Rebecca Chun, a senior research analyst who had made her skepticism about Sarah's qualifications abundantly clear from day one. Thought you might find this helpful, Rebecca had written in precise script. Corporate culture can be challenging for those new to professional environments. Sarah stared at the manual's cover, a cheery illustration of business, people climbing a ladder, and felt the familiar sting of being judged inadequate. Rebecca, with her MBA from Wharton and family connections in Chicago's business elite, represented everything Sarah wasn't: polished, confident, entitled to her place in the corporate hierarchy. The subtle undermining had started during Sarah's second week. Comments about her non-traditional background during team meetings, questions about whether she was comfortable with the analytical rigor required for serious research, suggestions that her community college education might not have prepared her for this level of intellectual discourse. Don't let her get to you, whispered David Park, a fellow research coordinator who'd started the same week. Rebecca thinks anyone without an Ivy League pedigree is slumming it here. But the comments were taking their toll. Sarah found herself second-guessing every contribution, over-preparing for meetings until she could recite statistics from memory, staying late to ensure her work was beyond reproach. The confidence she'd been building at Northwestern began to erode under the constant implication that she didn't belong. The breaking point came during a presentation on urban literacy initiatives. Sarah had spent weeks compiling data, interviewing community leaders, and developing recommendations based on her frontline experience. Her slides were precise, her arguments well supported, her passion evident. "Interesting perspective," Rebecca commented when Sarah finished, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "Though I wonder if someone with more academic grounding might have approached the theoretical framework differently. These community-level insights are valuable, of course, but they lack the scholarly rigor we typically expect for policy recommendations." The room fell silent. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, the familiar shame of being found wanting by people who seemed born knowing the rules she was still learning. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, old foster care instincts warning her not to challenge. Authority figures publicly. Dr. Vasquez, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward. "Actually, Rebecca, I found Sarah's integration of field experience with quantitative analysis quite sophisticated. The theoretical framework she's developed draws from multiple disciplines: sociology, education policy, community development. It's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to address complex urban challenges." "Of course," Rebecca replied smoothly. "I simply meant that in academic circles." "In academic circles," Dr. Vasquez interrupted with gentle firmness, "lived experience combined with rigorous research methodology is considered the gold standard. Sarah's work demonstrates both theoretical understanding and practical wisdom. That's rare." After the meeting, Sarah retreated to her office, the office hierarchy manual still mocking her from her desk. She was contemplating whether she'd made a terrible mistake, leaving the library's predictable safety when Marcus appeared in her doorway. "Rough meeting?" he asked, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes kind. "I'm not sure I'm cut out for this," Sarah admitted, gesturing at the manual. "Maybe Rebecca's right. Maybe I don't belong in this world." Marcus stepped into her office and closed the door. "Can I tell you something? When I first got to Seattle, my uncle enrolled me in a private school where everyone seemed to know things I'd never learned. Table manners, social codes, cultural references I didn't understand. I felt like an imposter every single day. But you figured it out, eventually. But not by trying to become someone else. By understanding that my different background gave me perspectives those privileged kids couldn't access. Your insights about community needs, about serving overlooked populations, that's not a limitation, Sarah. That's your superpower." He paused, looking out her window toward the city where they'd both learned to survive. "Don't let people like Rebecca convince you that your authenticity is inadequacy. The work you're doing matters precisely because you understand it from the inside." After he left, Sarah picked up the hierarchy manual and dropped it in her recycling bin. She had work to do, real work that could transform lives, and she wasn't going to let anyone's condescension stop her from doing it. The company newsletter featuring Sarah's story arrived in everyone's email inbox on a crisp November morning. Its headline reading, "From Foster Care to Foundation Scholar, The Journey of Sarah Mitchell." Accompanying the article was a professional photograph that somehow captured both her quiet dignity and newfound confidence. Sarah stared at her computer screen in disbelief. Marcus had asked for permission to share her story weeks ago, explaining that Wellington Industries highlighted scholarship recipients to inspire other community members. But seeing her face and history laid out for hundreds of employees felt overwhelming and terrifying. The article was beautifully written, focusing on her innovative literacy programs and academic achievements while handling her foster care background with sensitivity. It mentioned their childhood connection only briefly. CEO Marcus Wellington first met Sarah during their shared time in Chicago's foster care system, where her kindness left a lasting impression that motivated his commitment to educational opportunities for underserved youth. Within an hour, Sarah's inbox began filling with messages. Some were the predictable corporate responses, polite congratulations from colleagues who barely knew her name. But others carried genuine warmth and shared experiences that surprised her. "I aged out of foster care in Indiana, wrote Tom Fitzgerald from the accounting department. "Thank you for showing that our backgrounds don't define our limitations." "My grandmother raised me after my parents died," added Maria Santos from legal. "Your story reminds me that family isn't just biology. It's the people who believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves." Most unexpected was the response from Rebecca Chun, who appeared at Sarah's office door that afternoon looking uncharacteristically subdued. "I owe you an apology," Rebecca said without preamble. "I read your story, and I realize I've been unwelcoming. My privilege made me assume that different backgrounds meant inferior qualifications." Sarah looked up from her research, surprised by the admission. "Rebecca, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Rebecca sat down uninvited, her usual polished composure cracked. "I grew up in Winnetka, went to boarding school, had every advantage money could buy. I never had to prove I belonged anywhere. What you've accomplished, starting from where you started, it's humbling." The conversation that followed was awkward but honest. Rebecca's competitiveness, Sarah learned, stemmed from her own insecurities about living up to family expectations. They didn't become friends, but they reached an end, understanding that allowed for mutual respect. The real impact of the article became clear during the quarterly company meeting. Marcus stood before the assembled staff, his usual corporate presentation replaced by something more personal. "This company's success isn't just measured in profit margins or market share," he began, his eyes finding Sarah in the audience. "It's measured in our ability to recognize potential wherever we find it and create opportunities for people to exceed their own expectations." He spoke about the importance of diverse perspectives in solving complex problems, about how traditional hiring practices often overlook the most innovative thinkers. Sarah Mitchell represents everything we aspire to be as an organization: compassionate, intelligent, committed to service, and unwilling to accept that the way things are is the way things must remain. The applause was genuine and sustained. Sarah felt hundreds of eyes on her, but instead of the usual urge to disappear, she found herself sitting straighter, owning her place in this room full of accomplished professionals. After the meeting, Dr. Vasquez pulled her aside. "We've received 3 inquiries from other foundations interested in replicating our scholarship model," she said with a smile. "Your story is inspiring systemic change." Walking home that evening, Sarah reflected on how profoundly her world had shifted. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible in the library, her contributions unnoticed and unremarked. Now her face was on corporate newsletters, her story was inspiring policy changes, and her voice was being heard in rooms where decisions were made. But the most meaningful response had come from Charlotte, who'd called that morning with tears in her voice. "Sarah, I have 3 patrons here who read about you online. They're asking about literacy programs and educational opportunities. You're not just changing your own life, you're showing other people what's possible." That, Sarah realized, was the true measure of transformation, not just climbing higher yourself, but extending a hand to pull others up behind you. The new Found Dog flyer that Sarah created for the Wellington Foundation's community outreach program was a thing of beauty professionally designed, but retaining the hand-drawn warmth that had characterized her original effort. Instead of a lost pet, this flyer advertised something more precious: found opportunities for those who've been overlooked, educational scholarships, career mentorship, and community support. No one gets left behind. 18 months after her first encounter with Max in the library alley, Sarah stood in the renovated downtown branch as the newly appointed Director of Community Engagement. The space buzzed with activity that would have been unimaginable during our days as an invisible assistant computer classes for seniors, after-school tutoring for foster children, job interview workshops for the homeless population she'd served quietly for years. "The Henderson Scholarship recipients arrive next week," Charlotte announced, consulting her tablet as she approached Sarah's desk. Charlotte had become Sarah's assistant coordinator, trading her circulation duties for the chance to help expand the programs they dreamed about during lunch breaks. Sarah smiled, thinking of the 5 young people who would soon begin their educational journeys with Wellington Foundation support. The Henderson Scholarship, named for Max, whose full registered name was Henderson's Golden Boy, had grown from Sarah's initial award into a comprehensive program serving foster youth across Chicago. Any word from Marcus about the expansion proposal? Charlotte asked. He approved funding for 3 more library branches, Sarah replied, unable to suppress her grin, and the mobile literacy unit for elderly housing communities. Their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper over the months. Not quite the childhood friendship they'd shared, but a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Marcus attended every program launch, offering quiet support and strategic guidance, while Sarah provided the community insight that kept their initiatives grounded in real need rather than corporate good intentions. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to Sarah's office. Mrs. Chun, now volunteering as a genealogy research mentor, stopped by to report that 3 families had successfully traced their immigration histories. Tom Fitzgerald from accounting had started a support group for former foster children working in corporate environments. Even Rebecca Chun had surprised everyone by proposing a financial literacy workshop for scholarship recipients. As closing time approached, Sarah performed a ritual that echoed her library days, straightening chairs, ensuring computers were properly secured, checking that informational displays were current. But instead of the solitary routine she'd once known, she was surrounded by colleagues and volunteers, all part of a community that had grown from one woman's simple act of kindness. Marcus appeared in the doorway as she gathered her things, Max padding beside him with the dignified air of a dog who understood his importance in bringing 2 souls together. "How did the Northwestern presentation go?" he asked, referring to Sarah's morning lecture to graduate students about community-based research methodology. "They asked good questions," Sarah replied, scratching behind Max's ears. "One student reminded me of a smart, but convinced she doesn't belong in academic spaces." "What did you tell her?" "That belonging isn't about where you start. It's about what you choose to do with the opportunities you're given." They walked toward the exit together, past walls lined with photos of scholarship recipients, program participants, and success stories that proved transformation was possible at any age, from any starting point. Outside, the October evening carried the same crisp promise that had characterized the day. Sarah first found Max. As they paused at the corner where their paths would diverge, Marcus handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a new origami crane, this one folded from the pages of a Wellington Foundation annual report that featured Sarah's programs prominently. "Some traditions," Marcus said softly, "are worth continuing." Sarah smiled, thinking of all the cranes she'd folded over the years. Nervous habits transformed into symbols of hope, small gestures that carried enormous meaning. Tomorrow she would teach origami to the after-school program children, showing them how something fragile could become beautiful with patience and care. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that travel through decades, connecting souls across impossible distances and proving that no gesture of love is ever truly invisible. In helping one lost dog find his way home, Sarah had discovered her own path to a life she'd never dared imagine, one where her quiet strength could change the world, one person at a time.